welcome. Keith has laid out some of the plans for you. We're going to begin with a word from the bishop now. Dean's going to play a video for us.
Hey everyone, it's Bishop Bill Tesh, and I'm happy to be joining you this weekend in this way using the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel appointed for this Sunday, Luke chapter 24. Special greeting to those of you who are gathering on Saturday for practicing resurrection. Thank you for your commitment to this important process of leadership development and transformation for our congregations. And to all the rest of you, I hope you find this useful. We're going to hear from Luke's Gospel now. I'm going to just share my screen real quick so you can see. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked alongside them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, where they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. In this story, Jesus joins his disciples on the road. Of course, they don't recognize him at first. They join him, and Jesus does three things. I think he joins them on this painful journey that they're on, this journey of grief and I would say despair. And we could even claim that for ourselves right now, maybe not despair, but this has been a journey of grief that we've been on as a people, as a planet, and certainly as a church as well. Jesus joins them in this, and he invites them to take 3 steps. He invites them, first of all, to name and claim their grief. He invites them to talk about the things that have happened. And I think that's important for us to remember, both in these times and as church leaders, that we name and claim what is being lost. Much is being lost these days. Graduations, opportunities to gather with family, loved ones are being lost. Jobs are being lost. So much is being lost. And in these times, we need to stop and claim this grief. And Jesus invites his disciples to do just that. He invites them to name and claim their grief. I think that's true also for church communities that are experiencing transformation or moving towards renewal. Oftentimes that means leaving some things behind, some ways of doing things, some practices, perhaps even a building, and moving towards something new. And there needs to be a time for grief as well. Jesus then invites the disciples to remember the second step, to remember who God is. And he opens the scripture to them. And they are reminded that God is the one who's always been faithful, who continues to show up, and who made certain promises about one who was to come. In fact, the Son of God, Jesus himself, who was to come, suffer at the hands of people and die on the cross. So the disciples are able to understand that God has been with them in the past, is with them today, and will be with them in the future. And the same is true of us. In this time and place, we have space and time to dwell in God's word and to remember who God is, to remember God's faithfulness to us, to remember that God in Jesus Christ has loved us with a love that will never let us go, and to continue to claim those promises that we have through Jesus. And as church communities, I've been blessed to be a part of many renewal processes in congregations, and I've seen amazing things happen as God has transformed churches. And I can say it never happens unless people engage in dwelling in God's word and deepening their own walk with God, walk with Jesus through engagement with Scripture. So I encourage you to be a part of that as a faith community as well. And then Jesus invites his disciples to notice him. In this case, it's in the breaking of the bread. In that moment when the disciples see and recognize there's this very same Lord who was with them just a few nights before in that Last Supper. There's so many ways that we can see Jesus at work in our lives right now. And in fact, I'll often invite people to name the ways they are seeing Jesus show up, and they never have a hard time answering. But oftentimes, until we stop to pause to notice, we miss it. And so take some time in these days to notice where Jesus is showing up in your life. It might be in the simple blessing of some bread that is broken with either alone at home or with others in your household, possibly even fresh baked bread these days. It could be in a beloved pet, or in the opportunity to see a child smile or play with kids. It could be out in God's creation and seeing the ways in which we are healed by the blessing of creation. So many ways in which Jesus shows up day to day, and we're invited to see that. These things, of course, are not sacraments like Holy Communion, which we see depicted here through the lens of this story of the road to Emmaus, but they are sacramental. They are ways in which God comes to us and mediates God's love and grace to us. So I invite you to notice the ways in which Jesus is showing up. And so, my brothers and sisters in Christ, siblings across northwestern Minnesota, God's peace be with you on this blessed weekend. And remember that we are in this together, and that we will move through this time together with the full awareness that just like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jesus joins us along this way. God's peace be with you.
Indeed, beautiful words from our bishop this morning. One of the beautiful things that I find that when I read these stories about Jesus's encounters with the disciples after his death and his resurrection is that he says, "Be not afraid." And I think during times of transformation, at least in the churches I have served, that's when fear pops up, is when change comes. And so I think those are beautiful words. Be not afraid, be changed. Let your heart burn as you encounter Jesus. And I'm sure in the last month, as we gather this day, we're going to hear stories of ways that our hearts have been burning in finding and seeing Jesus in new and transformed ways. So let us begin with a word of prayer. Oh, gracious God, we give you thanks for this beautiful Saturday, for technology that allows us to gather. Even though we are physically distancing, we are still your church. We are gathered together as one, and we are united as the body of Christ. Bless our conversations, bless our work this day as we continue to work to be your church, as we are continually transformed, not just by the pandemic, but that we are transformed by your love, your grace, and the fire that is burning in us, that you are sending us out to be a church in a whole different way than we had ever imagined months ago. Bless our time this day. Amen. And now I'm going to turn it back to Dean if there's any technical stuff that people need to know, Dean.
That's pretty funny considering I'm the guy that just caused us a delay. So a couple things to pay attention to. At the bottom of your screen, you've got participants and chat. And when you click on those, it'll open up windows on the right side of your screen so you can pay attention to what's happening there. When you do that, your own name should be at the top of the participants list, and you should be able to click on that and see a couple of options. You can mute and unmute yourself there. You can also mute and unmute yourself down at the bottom left of the screen. But we ask that unless we're in a conversational part of the conference, of the workshop, that you would keep yourself muted unless it's a point at which you've got something that you're contributing. Except for the breakout sessions when the small groups will all be talking together. We do ask that you leave your video on so that our presenter can get feedback and see what's happening with us and be able to work together with us that way. When you get into the breakout sessions, we'll be doing that a little bit later. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's also a thing that says share screen, and I would encourage you as congregational teams to identify a leader that will share their screen. There's an option for a whiteboard where you can keep track of notes, and then you can save those notes as well. What else? We are recording because there are a couple of congregations that are needing to look back at this later and take in what's happening. So bear in mind that that's being recorded. When Zoom records, the other thing to note is that in the chat session, if you send a private message to somebody, that will be recorded and show up later when you view the recording later. Are there any other basic questions?
How do people ask a question?
Oh, you can, when you're looking at the participants list, you should have the option to raise your hand as well. And the host will see that your hand is raised and can call on you then. The other thing is if, so Rick, would you like to talk about at what points you're liking to lecture and at what points you're looking for some feedback or even potential interruption?
Sure. Never interrupt me. That's always a bad idea. But if you can put a comment in on the chat bar, or if you have a question on the chat bar, you can do that. And Dean, as the host, will review that. And if he determines that we need to, clarify something, he'll interject. So don't feel bad if you put something in the chat and we don't respond to it right away. We will get back to you at some point later on if it's something that could be waited for the rest of the group. Thank you. Keith, would you like to give us a word this morning?
Yes, let's see here. Yes, I want to, would like to welcome everybody as well. And then an instruction during the restroom, where you can find the restroom. Oh, wait, we're not in the fellowship hall at Grace Lutheran in Detroit Lakes. I want you to know that if you need to get up and stretch or stand up, feel free to do some movement and can do that and still stay connected. I also, in just paving the way here for the Reverend Dr. Rick Morris, our workshop leader, I'm an old Trekkie, Star Trek, Next Generation. Every episode began with the words boldly going, and every episode ended with Captain Picard saying engage. Those are words that readily come to mind when I think about you and how you have come to this day, preparing yourself, fully engaged and boldly going. And it's not lost on our synod, on the other congregations, and on our synod leadership and our bishop. And this is both a source of inspiration and information. This trail we're blazing together is going to benefit many congregations. And I thank you for being this cohort of disciples of our Lord Jesus and giving yourself to being equipped and encouraged to be transformative leaders in transformative congregations. It is indeed a blessing, and it's a special blessing too to have you with us, Rick. And you take it from here, and God bless you.
Well, thank you. This took us a while to get started today, but I will try to crack the whip on you all and keep things moving along. And hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be in a good spot. I have my cell phone number located here on the screen. If you need to text me a question, you can do that as well. Or if you have some sort of comment that you want to make, you can text me and I will actually look at that. And this goes for when we go into breakout groups. I won't have control, since I'm not the host. I don't have control to go wandering in and out of your meetings. But if I give you instructions and you're in small groups and you're working and you're having difficulty, this is the text number that you can send to, and we'll talk you down and get you into the next place of being. I've done these kind of webinars before in different formats and different technology. My hat is off to both Hope and to Dean for their help in getting us going and to keep us into our breakout rooms and all those other things. Another note about breakout rooms, there'll be a tiny little clock at the top of your breakout room. That tells you how much time before you get kicked out of your breakout room. And Zoom is unforgiving. When it reaches 0, it's gonna put you into the whole group and turn all your microphones back off. And so when I give you a task to do, you should probably get right to the task and work as a group and be mindful of time so that you can get through that. I just want to remind you where we are in the process. And thank you all for your ability to be adaptive leaders. And that is adapting to new ways of doing gatherings. This is not going to be as much fun as it is when we're together. For one thing, I won't get to see a dance. And that's the part that I enjoy the most. And I won't get to see a struggle with some of the exercises. But I think we're going to have a good time. And I think this will be productive and keep your church on target for where we need to be in this process at this time. So just as a reminder, we formed up back in January. We started forming our teams as congregations. Last time we gathered together in the workshop, we were working on what does it mean to be a transformational leader? Because unless you're a transformational leader, we're not going to transform anything. We're going to go through this whole process and recreate the church for 1950. We've got to be thinking outside the box. So the last session, we talked about how to be an adaptive leader. And the second session that we're doing today is going to be working on how to develop a future story for the congregation. I just want to kind of give you a word of warning. We are not going to complete a future story today for your congregation. All we're going to do is give you the tools for getting started to do that. We're just going to give you the tools to help you begin the creative process of creating that story and how to find that story that makes best sense for your location and where you're at. When we get together the next time, which I believe is in June, we're going to be working on how to convert that story then into capacity building. And then when we get together again, after we've done that, we're going to give you some challenges to start enacting, living into that future story so that you as a congregation immediately get into it. We don't want to have a process where we talk everything to death and we do this planning and everything, and we don't actually pull the trigger and begin being the new church that we're hoping to become. So this is a journey. It's not a process you will ever finish because you'll constantly be as a church in a state of renewal. But we hope that you will look at your community through fresh eyes and that through this process, you'll be able to become the kind of church that God has. Our focus today is on developing an inspiring future story. Future story is our imagined future of where we want to be in 5 years, and most importantly, where we believe God wants us to be as a congregation. As I mentioned to you the last time we were together, I completed the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, which is a long pilgrim's journey. I did 108 miles in 6 days, something like that. Had a wonderful experience meeting people from all over the world. But every morning when I got up, I had this image of the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela in my mind. This is the church over the burial place of St. James. And that's where we as pilgrims are trying to get to. We're all going along this trail, trying to get to this particular spot on the face of the planet. In fact, in this square in front of the cathedral, there is a brick with a cross on it. And when you are a pilgrim, you want to stand on that brick because that means you've completed your pilgrimage. That means you've gotten to the place where you were called to do. An inspiring future story is that image of where you want to be as a congregation. It's the thing that is going to propel people to get out of bed, to get moving, and to pack their bags and to go to that new way of being. And it's important to have that image. And we'll talk about how important these stories are as we go throughout the day. Just want to remind you where you're at. Last time we got together, we defined what a transformational leader is. Transformational leader is someone who inspires a group of volunteers to go someplace they never thought they could go. We explored our shifts in culture. We agreed to challenge assumptions. We explored congregational lifestyle and theory U. In the past, we've explored what leadership styles look like, and we discovered a little bit about what it means to become missional as a church. And we are working hard at asking good questions. I want to remind you of our covenants of presence, especially when you get into your church groups and you're having the conversation. We want to be fully present and extend and presume welcome. We want to listen to each other generously. We want to claim and author those stories for ourselves, for who we are. We want to recognize that we all come as equals, whether we've been a member of that congregation for 50 years or we've been a member of that church for 6 months. We have the same spot at the table. It's never share or die. If, particularly when we get into some of these exercises, if it's uncomfortable for you, you don't have to do it. And this is the most important one. We are not fixing anything today. We're not gonna fix your church. We're not gonna create a new parking lot because studies show we need visitor parking spaces. We're not fixing anything today. We're just going to be naming our condition as a congregation, trying to name some of our passions and things like that, and to work ourselves along. And then finally, we want to hold these stories with care, being mindful and respectful of time. When the timer goes off, you're not going to have a choice because the technology is going to boot you in here. But keep the conversations focused and keep the conversations moving ahead. And finally, believe that it is possible for us to emerge from our time together refreshed and less burdened than when we came. There's some bad things that could happen. I used to be believe it or not, I was a locomotive engineer on the railroad while I was working my way through college. I used to run the train. And this was a picture that you would never want to see. You would never want to see a truck filled with gasoline parked on the road crossing as you're approaching a crossing as a train. There's a lot of things we don't want to see come out of today and your work that you're doing as a church too. The first thing is, it would be a shame to go through this process if you're not bold in your vision and the images that you're going to try to put together. Don't put together some mamby-pamby vision that's going to take you 5 years to accomplish. Do something that's bold. Think outside the box. Transformational leaders are never stuck in just doing things the same way all the time. And we're not worried about trying to just keep people happy. The second thing that would be a terrible outcome would be if the focus is on saving a particular program within the life of our church. I worked with a church a few years back where the Christian Women's Fellowship was the most important thing in the world. And it seemed like everything that we did in our future development of a future story was to protect a program area that somebody thought was near and dear to their heart. That would be the worst thing, is if we focus on just doing a particular program. The other thing is, if we only think of doing mission to a community rather than doing mission with a community. A lot of times you've had your community interviews, you've talked with community officials, you're starting to see things that we need to engage in. But if we think about, we are going to do this for them, or we're going to do this to the community, then we're not really engaging in mission with the community. And that's not a future story that I think would be very, very helpful. And finally, if our concern is about pleasing ourselves rather than serving God, you know, this isn't a kind of process where we're asking people to say, what do you want to do with our church? This is where we're asking the question, what is it God is challenging us to do in our community and in the world in which we're a part of? Not how can we please Aunt Smyrna, but how can we be faithful, the hands and feet of Jesus in this world and in this community as we are. We're going to break you into church groups here in just a few moments. And when we do, you're going to be referring now back to your congregational assessments that you've done in your homework. And we're also going to be looking at reports from your spies. Those are the people that have gone out and done community interviews. We're going to categorize those reports in these 3 areas. And you should have received a copy of this slide before, but I want to just kind of go over this for a few moments so that you understand the task that's ahead of us. Jim Collins wrote a great book a few years ago called Good to Great. Anybody read that? Hold your hands up if you've read that book. Okay. All right. Kind of hard. I have to keep pushing buttons if I'm going to see some people. Thank you. Well, it was a great book, and there was he wrote a second section entitled Good to Great for the human services sector, or for the nonprofit sector. And it was an equally meaningful kind of book. What Jim Collins did in that book was he looked at a number of very excellent organizations, and he said, what is the thing that was different from an excellent organization from just a good organization? And he looked primarily at the business community, and he found that there were these 3 lenses that they tend to look at everything through: their passion, their best at, and their resources that they have. And what they did was they did that fusing of those 3 of them and developed the deep center, which is what we've been calling our why as a congregation. So what I want you to do is, when we get together in our church groups, is we're going to be looking at your church through these 3 lenses and looking at your community through these 3 lenses. The first lens is passion. What is it that we are passionate about as a congregation? What is it when we're doing it, time just seems to fly? What is it when we do it, we are having the best time, we're laughing, we're having a good time, we're almost giggly as we do it? What is it that we lay in bed looking forward to when we get together as a faith community? There are certain ways that you can get at your passion as a congregation. One way that you can begin to identify your passion as a congregation is look at your church calendar. What have you been doing over the last few years? What is it you seem to do over and over again? If you're like my church, it's a lot of potluck dinners. When you look at it, what does it say about your hunger for learning? What does it say about your hunger as lifelong students or lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ? What is it that seems to really float your boat as a congregation when you are together? Another thing for you to consider as you're talking about your passion is looking at your congregation profile. When you look out at your congregation on a Sunday morning, is it predominantly old people, or do we have younger people that are infusing some energy into the life of our worship, into the life of our congregation and who we are? What is it that is adding to our passion when we look at other things within congregational life? So passion is passion. It's identifying those things in your congregation that really make you happy, the things that really float your boat, the thing that energize you as a faith community. When we look at best at, there's 2 categories that we can look at best at. Number 1 is, what is it that our church is really best at? When you talk to people in your community, what do they think that your church is really the best at? What is it that they think that you guys really excel at when you're doing it? What do you think of your congregation? What do you think your congregation excels at? So there's the best at for you internally, but there's also the best at in terms of the community. That best at would be, what is it that our community needs us to be best at? If we were to be the hands and feet of Jesus, what is it, the place where we're doing ministry, needs us to excel? Where do they need us to be the best at? So there's 2 areas of the best at. The first is, what is it we are best at as a congregation? If people looked at us from the outside, But the second is, what does our community, for the sake of God's mission, need us to be best at? The third category that we talk about was in your spreadsheet as well. Oh, and back to the best at, you can get information about that from your community interviews. What did you learn when you talked to school district people? What did you learn when you talked to health officials? What did you learn about your community when you were talking to those leaders in your community? What is it they're saying you need to be the best at? That's where you can get some of that information from. And you can also get it from your demographics. When you look at your demographics, what does it say about household income? What does it say about family structures? What did it say about other things that might potentially give you some access or ideas about need? So the third and final area that we look at is resources. That's where we talk about building, finances, volunteers, other things like that. You did some calculations on the assessment worksheet that we gave you at the end of the last gathering. You were able to put together, do we have a lot of surplus building space? What percentage of our building does that say that we're actually using? When we look at the assessment, what does it say about our financial situation? I was surprised one time I was working with a church, they had $300,000 in the bank and nobody on the leadership team knew that they had money in the bank. You know, what kind of resources do you have to work with as a congregation? Does it say you have too much building, that it's not being utilized enough? What is your assessment saying about all of those kinds of things? So let me get my timer out here. Just a second. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you 30 minutes in your breakout groups. And I'm hopeful that Dean is getting ready to launch us into that. You'll have 30 minutes during that time. And your job during that 30-minute period of time is to identify your congregation's passion, what you think your congregation is best at, and what the community needs you to be best at, and what resources do we have to work with? Do we have ample resources? Are we doing poorly on that? Is that clear? If you'd nod your heads, yes or no? All right, well, at least Keith thinks it's clear, so that's good enough for me. So Dean, go ahead and break us into groups, and we'll see you in 30 minutes. Good, it looks like we're all back. Thank you for coming as quickly as you could back. I'm sure this was not a satisfying experience, that this was too little time to really isolate and talk about all these things. And if you're a good church, that was way too little time to identify these things. And I just want to tell you that you're going to get a chance to deal with this a little bit more as you get ready to start developing your future story. I'm going to pick on some people to report out. Is there, let's see here. Yeah, okay. I would like to hear from somebody from the Park Rapids Church. Let's see, that would be, I'm just going to pick a name. How about Roger Olson? Roger, where are you? Anybody see Roger? Unmute yourself, Roger. Oh, I don't see Roger.
Seem to see Bob Berdahl.
Who?
Bob Berdahl.
Okay, can you identify for us what you really thought about maybe your congregation's passion being? What does it seem that your congregation's passion is?
Okay, if you're going to ask me, Roger Olson, I think our largest passion is our community in which we live, and our openness and our being creative and innovative, especially being welcoming to the community needs, whether it be the hunger or the stranger on the street or the people who walk with their own particular problems. We're also a congregation who looks beyond its edges, and we're finding, for example, we're within driving range of the Native American communities, and we're picking up on those.
Great.
Also
That's a great conversation.
Very willing to, we have a strong youth program in our congregation. We have youth that not only, a youth director not only serves the children and the youth of our church, but of the community, the wider community in which we live.
Great. Excellent. Comstock Hoff, let's see, Jill, since you and I texted with each other for a moment, could you report to us a little bit about your conversation that your church had? What was your passion?
Cassie Huseman's our spokesperson. She is our scribe. Cassie, can you speak?
Unmute
Sure.
yourself. Yeah, there she is.
We decided that our passion was serving one another, serving together, whether that be meals, whether that be fundraisers that we do together, things where we're together as a community and as a congregation. We're very good at it and we're passionate about it. Also, we talked about our young people. Anything that comes to our young people in our church, we're passionate about. And if we ask for things for our young people, people step up and are willing to give their time, their energy, and their resources. So we had.
Wonderful. And what, in terms of best at, what kind of conversations did you have about best at? What does your community need you to be best at?
We said that we were probably best at our worship. How we've done that, we've kind of created something that goes well for us. But we think that we need to be best at meeting people where they are with the changing lifestyles of people. People are busy. People have a lot of choices. So rather than trying to find a one size fits all, we need to be better at meeting people where they're at.
Excellent. Well, good job. You guys came a long ways in a short time. How about First Lutheran and Parker's Prairie? Rachel, do you have somebody or do you want to speak?
I can talk for us, I guess. So one of the things that kind of came up in our interviews that, as well as just our conversation about something that we should probably become good at and needful not only in this time, but in general, is support for families that are just under sort of tremendous stress, you know, and overwhelmed. And actually that aligns with one of our values. So, you know, that's something for us to work on. And yeah, and the other thing we identified that we're good at is some of the social activities that take place out in and outside of the building itself. Nothing's happening in the building right now, but when you know, anywhere. But when we can have those activities, then folks from the community are feeling welcomed and are getting involved in those activities that are outside of our congregation. So, and then also our midweek service during the summer creates an opportunity for not only the congregation, but for the community to come and join us.
Wonderful. It sounds like you guys did a great job processing that. How about Calvary Lutheran in Perham? Is that how you say it, Perham? And let's see, Dennis?
So it's pronounced Perham.
Perham, yeah, sorry.
One of the things that Calvary is noted for in the community is if people are needing help with something, they are sent to Calvary. Calvary has a strong, it's called outreach ministries. There's furniture, there is gas cards, and the congregation is incredibly generous in funding the gas cards and working on these things. There's a backpack program. There's a whole host of things that Calvary does for the community. One thing we didn't talk about, Calvary provides radio broadcast and also a recorded TV broadcast on Tuesdays. So that is there for the community.
How about your passion, Dennis? What did you identify as the thing that you were most passionate about as a congregation?
Yeah, so the outreach, the care for community, being a welcoming community to the, or welcoming congregation to the community. I took notes on a whiteboard, but I can't find it now, so.
Oh, well, good luck on that. Well, thanks for sharing, Dennis. And let's go to Bagley. I've got Mark Olson down. Mark, do you want to appoint somebody or give us a report out about how your conversation went?
I'm going to defer to the chair of our strategic planning group, Joel Hood.
Okay.
Joel, you want to take that?
There we go. Yeah, our passions, we do a community Christmas dinner that our community gets behind, and we offer at our church and have for the past 20 years. It's very well attended. There's no income guidelines or anything. It's just a meal that's always open. Our church gets behind that, and the community gets behind and helps us out greatly. We have a county fair in our community, and we have run a food booth out of that county fair for many years. So that's another one of our passions. Some future passions, I guess, we have that we'd like to work towards is working with the school and possibly have a Boys and Girls Club established in any way our church could help with that. That's something we're looking for in the future, I think.
Wonderful. You know, if that's all you came up with today, that would be worth the price of admission right there. That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing, all of you. And we're going to pick on the other churches after we do our second exercise. And I'm going to go now to screen share again, and we'll get ready to go on our next part of what we're talking about. So when you get back in your groups, you're going to have more depth conversation about this. You know, it sounds to me like from the feedback from the congregation, this is a good first view. But now we need to go a lot deeper, you know, in terms of what our passion really is. You remember the story I told you about Mildred, who was the Nazi that ran the bazaar in Florida. You know, that, you know, when you ask the question, why do you do this? And you ask it 5 times, you finally get down to the reality of the situation. So when you get back in your groups, you need to talk about, why do we feel this is our passion? Why do we think this is our best at? You know, why do we think these resources are ample or not enough or whatever? You know, get down to a deeper level in terms of conversation. What I want to talk about now is what you do with those 3 circles once you get them. If I can get my computer to go on to the next slide. Go. So what we need to do next is we take and we combine those 3 circles together in a Venn diagram. And there's places where those circles overlap, and there's places where they don't overlap. The part that we're looking at is, where does it overlap? And that'll save you some time in conversation a little bit later on. So in this exercise, we're going to try to determine where is the overlap between our resources, our passions, and our best at, because that gets us to our why, or our deep center. So one of the things that one of the churches I worked with not too long ago came up with, when they looked at their community needs, they saw that their community had a real need around eye care. They lacked doctors in their community that could help people with their vision issues. There were a number of people that had severe vision issues that needed to have some work done. But they also agreed that they weren't passionate about it, and they didn't have any resources that they could put to it. So that's something the community needed them to be best at, but there's no overlap because they have no passion for it. Another congregation I worked with not too long ago in Lake Charles, Louisiana, the congregation was located right in the center of a predominantly African-American community. It was a predominantly white congregation in an African-American community. And so you can see right off the bat that there's some big gaps in terms of where they were. The other part was, this congregation was highly educated. There wasn't anybody in the congregation that didn't at least have a bachelor's degree. And they had many people with PhDs and master's degrees that were a part of the congregation, that taught at the local college, that did a lot of work in academics, in the academic community in the world. But when you looked at their context, we saw that the people that lived in that community hardly had GEDs. And so, being the brilliant, kind of consultant that I am, I said to them, I said, gosh, folks, here's a great need that the community has. And this is something that you guys could probably do, you know, with all your education background, you guys could probably help provide a lot of GEDs or help people in this community get an educational leg up. And they said, yes, but we're not passionate about that. We don't even like our neighbors, let alone want to do anything like this to help them. So at that point, then the conversation turned from what do we need to be best at to why are you here? If you're not going to do anything for your neighbors that are in this location and things like that, why are you doing ministry here? Maybe you should go somewhere else. And they did. They eventually relocated. So these overlaps are really important. Is this clear? Is this making sense? If you could nod your heads, kind of give me an idea for kind of. So what we're looking for is an area where we can combine our passion, best at, and resources. And so there was a church that I worked with in Washington, D.C. that was passionate about serving the elderly. They loved serving the elderly. And not only were they passionate about serving the elderly, the community had a great need for affordable senior housing. So this is a group of people that they've had success working with. This was a group of people that they love working with. And the community said, we have this great need too. In addition, they had a Christian education wing that they had not had a kid in for years. It was just a large building that's set to the side. They hadn't even been in it for years. When I went through the building, there were cobwebs and leaking roofs and all kinds of stuff to walk through while we were looking at the building. So we said the deep center would be, why don't you use that resource and the need of the community and your passion and put in affordable senior housing to serve the needs of people there. That was their deep center. It clicked with them. They did that. They developed a partnership with an organization. They put in 60 units of affordable senior housing in their building. And guess where those people go to church on Sunday? They walk down the hall to the church that's on that property that they're living on. That's when you can find the intersection of those 3 points. So what we're going to ask you to do is look at all the statements that you wrote in the last time that you gathered together as a church group. And we're going to put you in church groups again. And this time, as you get together in your church group, we want you to identify where in a Venn diagram like this, each of those statements goes. So for example, one church mentioned that they were passionate about serving the needs of the community. Well, if you don't have resources and you're not able to do that, then you wouldn't be in that category. But if you do have resources and you're passionate about serving the needs of people, and try to be as specific as possible, not just serving the needs of the community, but let's say people with hunger issues, then, and that's a need in the community, then that goes in your deep center. If it isn't, put it where it goes in the Venn diagram. Does that make sense for everybody? That's going to be your task now. We're going to break into groups, and Dean, when you put us into groups, if you would put us in for 20 minutes, just to kind of get the exercise on how this will work. So let's do a little report back and hear about how this conversation went. I'm sure that many of you are a little frustrated that you don't get to finish anything. Again, let me just remark and say, our goal isn't to finish anything here today, but it's to get things started so you can have deeper conversation a little bit later on. So if we could go to Staples, Faith Lutheran and Staples, let's see, I've got Carl Larson or anybody else who would like to speak.
I'm going to give it to Debbie.
Okay, Debbie. Unmute yourself, Debbie.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The main kind of focus of our conversation was meeting the needs of our community and younger families, and then being in our counties of our area or high poverty. So looking at a few things, some variety of how we deliver worship and some of that congregational activity, Bible studies, how we might start to look at the needs of the people in our community and how we offer some of our things. And then we also talked about serving our younger families. some ideas floating around on having some preschool options. We have a nice large facility that we have space that could be utilized many hours of the day that aren't, and how can we make some changes in the building and get the leadership. So talking about some research into some of that, and just engaging people around the community and not looking at it as much as what denomination you are, but as who wants to be part of our activities, and doing some partnerships with some other groups in that way too. And just we're already a hub for a lot of things and a lot of leadership within the group. So how can we reach out to the community and keep doing that?
Wow, that was great. That was wonderful thing about how all those circles came together. So that's getting a lot closer to what your deep center is as a congregation. And I like some of the thinking outside the box that, particularly when you talk about not worrying about the denominational label and things like that. It's about the ministry, not the denominational level. It's not about the recognition. It's about engaging people in God's mission. That's wonderful. Good job, Debbie. Let's go to Wild Rice Lutheran Church in Twin Valley. Let's see, Al.
I'll take that on. Well, the first thing to clarify, we are not just Wild Rice Lutheran in Twin Valley. We're Wild Rice Parish, 4 churches in, 4 different churches with 4 different personalities, and actually 2 different communities, and then 2 rural churches between those communities. So it was real hard to really zero in on, do we do this Venn diagram as an entire parish, or do we have 4 different ones for our 4 communities? And what we kind of talked about is things we've done well that seem to be across those 4, even though we're doing them individually. And we've had, again, 2 different community VBSs out of those 4 churches as far as being hosts. And they've had different looks to themselves, but successfully enjoyed that, and that matched with passion, resources, and what we were good at. With those 4 churches, we have 2 different public school districts, and both have backpack programs for those in hunger on the weekend. And our parish has been involved both in starting those programs and funding those over the years. And again, there's been a passion there. And also within the parish, we jumped on board on a specific charity, Bible Sticks for soldiers. And there was enthusiasm there, and we remembered we've done that a number of years, and there's been passion there. So even though we're broad and different personalities, definitely unique, we had some similarities, and we all agreed that we need to do this Venn diagram individually, each of the 4, and we didn't want to take this 20 minutes to do that, so we have more homework to do.
Yeah, you got more conversation to have, but I'm grateful that you brought that up, because each location, that's a lot of times people think, let's just do a ministry planning for generic church anywhere. Churches have got to be highly contextualized. They've got to be thinking about their specific area, their target area where they're doing mission and ministry. And what would be interesting is to have those conversations separately and see how all 4 of those Venn diagrams then line up. Because I'm sure that you've got some of those parishes have more passion towards certain age groups than others do, and or certain segments of the community than other groups do. So it's really important to find out what that is. Good job.
You just reminded me one thing I'll add.
Yeah.
We're appreciative of our parish structure, that individual decisions about giving dollars doesn't go through the parish, goes through the individual churches. So they can have their own separate passion instead of it having to be all of us together. And that works. Wonderful. I don't know if it works for other multiple points.
That's wonderful. And you're doing a lot of this in this particular synod too, which is important. First Lutheran Church in Audubon. Dean, or you got somebody in your group that would like to report out?
Patty, you want to take that? That might be a no. One of the, a number of things came up, and they all seem to center around discussion about young people. our passion, the community need, what we're good at, and where we throw our resources currently. So we've got a Wednesday after school outreach program that is in our line items in our main budget for about $6,000, and we've got an active Sunday school program. We work together with other churches around us in getting the older youth together, and the more we talked, the more young people came up. So that's a real clear focus that we've got.
That was neat. I was able a year ago to see pictures of that program that you do with the church with the grade schools, and I'm envious of that. To have that kind of connection with your local school and to be able to reach out to children. One of the things that I've missed over the last 20 years doing the kind of work that I do right now is not being able to see kids. I miss kids. I think that's some of the best work we do as churches is when we're working with children. Helping them with their faith formation at an early stage in life, and for a church to be engaged in that, I think is really powerful. Okay, well, I'm going to take the screen again here, and I can hear stomach starting to growl over there, so we'll start working our way towards lunch here. This is all really good preliminary work that you're doing, but you can tell, I'm sure, by the start of this conversation that this is something that's going to take a little bit longer to do. When we were in our group, I get to meet with some of the coaches when you're in your sessions. And one of the things that we talked about again was really helping us to keep the focus on our context where we're doing our ministry, not focusing on ourselves and what we want to do. And also remembering the fact that this isn't our mission, this is God's mission that we're talking about. We're not trying to do something that makes each other happy, but we're trying to do something that is going to connect us with God's mission in a way that's meaningful. That's really important. So when you get going on this as a group, you're going to come up with maybe a more clearly defined deep center. Jim Collins calls that the hedgehog concept. A hedgehog, when they get in trouble or anything like that, they protect themselves by forming a round ball and saving themselves from things, but they are determined to do what they want to do, to do what they want to do. I got a cat like that. You know, you can try to steer the cat any direction you want to, but that cat is going to go where the cat wants to go. And if you can focus on your why as a congregation, that gives a congregation a single purpose, and it helps that congregation to focus on the direction that it's going to go. So as you remember, we talked at the very beginning about working out of our why. It's why we exist. Why did God call us to do ministry in Battle Lake, or do ministry in Staples, or to do ministry in Comstock or Park Rapids? Why are we here? Why did God call us to this place? And what is God's purpose for us in this place? Not what do we want to do, what do we want to be engaged in, but why? And it's hard at this level of the conversation to not want to go directly into tactics and strategies. But you have to have clarity about why you exist before you can get into strategies, before you can get into those other kinds of things in order to get there. And we will give you some time to do that in a little bit. So Dean, at this point, if you would put us in breakout rooms for 30 minutes, then each church can have lunch with each other if they want to, or they can just avoid looking at each other. But then we would also have the timer on the screen, and we know when we're going to reconvene again.
Okay.
And so would that work to meet back in 30 minutes, everybody? All right, I got a 1 thumbs up. That's good enough for me because I'm hungry. It's 1 o'clock here. All right, let's take a break for lunch. We'll see you in 30 minutes.